So with that, I'm not going to start with a little story yet. What I'm going to do instead is, how many of you are aware of the newspaper? Well, actually, let me put it in different terms. How many of you are aware that the media often gets things wrong? Have you noticed this recently? And how many of you have also noticed that they have gotten into the bad habit of not saying sorry when they are wrong? That's a bad plan. I think that if you say something in public and it's inaccurate or it's wrong, you ought to own up to it. But that would require humility. And there's a lot of people that aren't going to do that. But I'm going to do that because when I speak publicly, if I get something wrong, or at a minimum, if I get it unclear in some way, or I make some kind of insinuation and it turns out not to be correct, I want to fix that. So that being said, last week I said from chapter 16 in Exodus, I said it in both services, that the quail lasted for 40 years. And somebody pointed out to me last week, that's not in the scripture. They are correct. I went and searched. Now, that is a tradition of the rabbis, but it is not in the scripture. So it is unclear from the scripture whether or not the quail lasted all 40 years or whether or not that was periodic, came here and there. In fact, there's another incident we're going to read about in Numbers that says, they wanted meat again, and God got so upset with them, he said, I'm going to give you so much meat, it's coming out of your nose. You know what I mean? And they had another quail rain that came down on them. So it is unclear from the scriptures whether or not that lasted 40 years. So I wanted to clarify that. The other thing I said also got pointed out in both services was I said that a thankful heart is the antidote to depression. How many of you remember me saying that? Okay, but I had some people, not one, but several, that wrote in. They were very concerned about the fact that there are people that have chemical problems that cause depression. And so if I say as a pastor, that the antidote to depression is a grateful heart, and somebody decides to go off their medication because of something I said, this could be bad. Could be really bad. So I want to make it clear, I'm not saying to anybody, ignore your doctor. I never said that. And I'm not saying go off your medication. If you have a genuine chemical deficiency in some way that triggers depression, go talk to your doctor about that stuff. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not telling you what to do medically. On the other hand, I will say it again. If you have a chemical dependency of a chemical deficiency of some kind, it triggers depression, right? So just like a bad incident in your life can trigger depression, so can a chemical deficiency trigger depression. But the key word there is trigger. That means that the depression itself is a symptom of either a chemical deficiency or some kind of traumatic thing in your life. Either way, while you might need help with the chemical deficiency, that's true, and I'm not saying don't do it. It is still true that a thankful heart is going to go against that depression. Does that make sense? So I wanted to make those two clarifications because I also want you to know it's important for me to be accurate. It's important for me to be, willing to put egg on my face if necessary to make a correction. I have no problem with that because we want to be as factual and as accurate as we possibly can be. But on the other hand, I also want you to see that sometimes these things are not cut and dry. They're not just, they're not easy. Does that make sense? We want to see that in general, people can get real legal. How many of you know people can get real legalistic real fast? And we don't want to necessarily go to the legalistic side of things where, where it's an issue. I can hear that right through the microphone. That's the reason I went, okay, that's not going to work. All right. Not that it's a bad water bottle, I don't want to see sales plummet here. It's just that You know, I am way off my notes here. I mean, this is just like, you know what I think I'll do? I think I'll start with a little story. That's what I'm going to do. Go ahead and roll it. Yeah. There you go.
Hey, man, can we ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Do you go to church?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Why not?
Why not? My wife does it for me. She handles that part of the job. So, not religious.
Do you go to church?
No,
Why not?
I just don't go to church.
Do you go to church?
Occasionally.
Do you go to church?
Yeah, no, I haven't been to church in a while.
Why not?
Just haven't. Don't have really the time for it.
Do you go to church?
No, I do not.
Why not?
It's forced on me as a child, so you always rebel against what you don't want to do, right?
You just don't want to go, and so you don't go?
Don't want to go, and it was never my choice until I was old enough to make that choice, and now I choose not to.
Do you go to church?
Oh, yes.
Why do you go to church?
Why I go to church? Ladies.
Do you go to church?
No, I don't. No.
Why not?
Doesn't suit my lifestyle.
Why is that?
I don't really know. I don't really have an answer on that.
Do you go to church?
Yeah,
How often?
not often.
Why not often?
I don't know.
You just don't have time?
Yeah, that's probably right.
You know, it seems to me, when you look at that, when you listen to that, that the church today has a PR problem. Can you see that? The church today has a perception problem. How the unchurched, that is, people who are not connected into a fellowship like this, how they perceive church has been really, really twisted. The truth of the matter is, I mean, those of us that are involved in this, we listen to that sort of thing and we almost want to run out there and grab those people and go, no, that's not true. That's not true about church. And try to get them to come in. But remember the statistic it said there, 82% of those people out there would actually come here if you invited them. That's the truth. But most of them never get an invitation. Most of them don't. I was at my other office this morning, Starbucks, and I was there going over the message. And all the kids behind the counter, they all know who I am. So when I walk in the door, they're already making my drink before I ever even get to the counter, which is really a nice thing. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside and everything. Okay, and so, but the girls behind the counter, and they already know that I'm leaving today. So they're all, oh, Pastor Pat, you're taking off. Are you going to be okay? Because they're not going to pray for me. They don't know to say, well, we'll pray for you, because they're not Christians. But they're all worried that, I'm going to this third world country. And the guy next to me says, you're going to Haiti? Well, yeah. And I start up a conversation. And guys, it only took me 30 seconds to invite him to church this morning. That's all it took. 30 seconds. Because once he heard, we started up this little conversation, and he shook my hand, and wow, that's really neat. You're going there. And why are you going there? And I explain it. And he goes, oh, so you're a pastor? And yeah. And I pull out my card and business card, hand him the card, and invite him to church. It's not that hard, guys. But most of us don't do it. Yet 82% of the unchurched would come if they were invited. So why aren't they coming? because they've got the wrong perception of what church should be all about. And we need to understand what God's perception of what we do here on a Sunday morning should be. We've been studying the book of Exodus chapter by chapter and verse by verse. That is what we do here. Most people out there in the world don't know that. They don't know what we do here. Well, what we do here is we go through the Bible chapter by chapter and verse by verse. If you want to know what's in the Bible, if you want to know what it means, if you want to know what it says, if you want to know how you could apply it into your life, this is the place you want to come, because we're going to talk about it. If you want to understand the history of it, you want to understand the people, you want to understand the culture behind it, if that interests you, this is the place you want to be. So we're going to finish out the book of Exodus, the chapter of 16 of Exodus where we were. Let's start at verse 22. Now it says this. Now, on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, twice as much manna. Remember, that's what we're talking about. 2 omers for each one. An omer could be as much as a gallon, might have been as small as a cup. We're not sure. It's somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, when all the leaders of the congregation came, and they told Moses, and they said to him, well, this is what he said to them. Because remember, they're normally gathering 1 omer. Now, all of a sudden, they're gathering 2. This is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a Sabbath observance. It's a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over, put it aside to be kept until the morning. Now remember, before, if they kept any of this overnight, it would spoil, it would stink, and it would breed worms. So now all of a sudden they're being told to keep it overnight. So he had to explain what's going on and why. And it seems kind of odd to you and I, but you have to understand that this that we're reading about right here was written down. This happened before Moses gave them what we know today of as the law. They didn't have the law. They didn't have anything written down. Now, what is the law? The law is the social and religious way of life that Moses wrote down, that he received from God, that he gave to the Hebrew people. It was specific for them. It was specific for them at a specific time and place. That's what the law was all about. So the idea of a Sabbath day came before the law was written out. That's important. That's really, really important to understand. Now, God gave them this extra manna. Why? So they wouldn't have to get it on the Sabbath day. Now, let's talk about the word Sabbath. You've heard it before. There's a bad band out there called Black Sabbath. Terrible music. Ozzy's a horrible singer, just so you know. But anyway, what is Sabbath? The word Sabbath in Hebrew is Shabbat or Shabbath, depending on which part of Israel you're from. Now, you can see the Hebrew words up there. You can see the S, the B, and the T at the end. It reads from right to left instead of left to right. Those are the 3 symbols you see there. Do you see the little diacritical marks in there? Those are called vowel marks. Do you see those little dots and dashes there? That tells you which vowel to use. Now, the word Shabbat means Sabbath. It means the 7th day. But it's related to another word in Hebrew that uses the exact same symbols. The S, the B, and the T, but it uses different vowels. So it's related to another word that's called Shaveth. Now, Shaveth means to cease, desist, rest, put an end to, or even destroy. So the words are related. They're spelled the same. They just have different vowel markings. In other words, what this word means is stop or rest from your other activities and focus your attention on being refreshed and reconnecting with God. That's what the word means. Okay, so let's go on from there. Exodus 16, verse 24. So they put it aside until morning, as Moses had ordered, and it did not become foul, nor was there any worm in it. And so Moses said, well, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath. The key here is to the Lord, a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. So the miracle of manna that was out there in the morning for them to pick up, this miracle bread, was a 24-hour miracle. If they didn't eat it after they collected it and they tried to keep it overnight, it's going to spoil, it's going to get worms. But before the Sabbath, there's now a second miracle happening. On Friday, they're going to get double so that on Saturday, they don't have to go out there and get it. That means that this day must be important in God's mind, or he would not have done this. Does that make sense? And it must be important in God's mind because he's explaining this before the law of Moses was written and given. Before the covenant, the agreement between God and the Hebrew people was made, he's already saying, the Sabbath, this is what I want you to do. That means that in God's mind, the Sabbath day is really, really, really important. In fact, it's so important, the principle of the Sabbath is so important, it later becomes part of the 10 Commandments. I mean, we're in the top 10 here. There's a lot of rules in the Hebrew law, but the top 10, those are the big ones. And the Sabbath day is in there. So the idea of taking one day out of every 7 in order to rest and connect intentionally with God, to reflect upon your total commitment, your total and complete dedication to God, one day in 7th, that's why it says a Sabbath to the Lord. It's about him in terms of it's dedicated to him. Well, where did that start? It started all the way back in Genesis. Right in the first chapter, it explains that God created the earth in how many days? 6 days. At the end of 6 days, on the 7th, he stopped his creative activity and he reflected on what he had made. He connected with it intentionally. Look what I made. This is cool. I'm going to rest in it. I'm going to be refreshed by what I have done here. Now, how many of you know that God has the power? Listen, if God can create everything out of nothing, could he not have created everything out of nothing in one blinding flash of creation? He certainly could have. I mean, on day 4, it's almost a side note. It says, oh yeah, he created the stars. God created hundreds of billions of stars instantly. He could have created all of everything in one blinding flash, but instead he did it in 6 distinct periods that we look back on, and there's a pattern there. There's a pattern. How many of you know that the 7-day work week is universal? But why? Where is that? Does it fit into 365 days nice and even? No, we're always going, is it 30 or 31 or 30, 28? I mean, how many of you do this? January, February, try to figure out if are we on the 31st or the 29th? We can't even figure it out. It doesn't make sense. It would be much more logical to take our work year and divide it up nice and evenly, but nobody does this. We all do it in sets of 7, worldwide. Why is that? Because it's ingrained right in your heart by the Creator. This is how I did it. This is the pattern. And you know, every attempt in history to get rid of a 7-day work week has failed. The French tried it during the French Revolution. They tried to make it a 10-day work week. It didn't work. Okay, the Russians in the Soviet Union, they tried to get rid of it because we don't follow all that Judeo-Christian nonsense. They're back to 7 days. Everybody has it. It's ingrained right in you because it goes all the way back to Genesis. This is the pattern. I created in 6 days, and on the 7th, I was refreshed. On the 7th, I ceased from my work. So that means that this is an important principle. This is a big principle. You can see the idea of the Sabbath day before the law of Moses. You can see it during the law of Moses, and you can see it afterwards. Because the New Testament writers, here they are saying, the law of Moses has been completed. It's been fulfilled by Jesus Christ. It's all tied up with a bow. It's all done. We don't have to live under those principles, the way of eating, the way of dressing. We don't have to live under that anymore because of what Jesus did on the cross. And yet there was still a great big argument about the Sabbath day. It was still an issue. In fact, it was such an issue that Paul had to get involved and say, look, it doesn't matter which day. It could be a Wednesday. Who cares what day? The key is there's a principle here. Take one day in 7 to rest, to be refreshed, to reconnect in your commitment to God. In fact, tradition tells us that the reason we worship on Sunday is because this is actually the first day of the week. Most of us think of this now. We've been doing this so long. This is the end of the week. Monday's our first day. But it's not so. This is the first day. Sunday's the first day of the week. And that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. So tradition has it that the Christians went, well, we've been going to the temple all these years on Saturday, but now that, hey, we don't need a temple because the temple's about sacrifices, right? We take animal sacrifices. Well, Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. We don't need to do sacrifices anymore because Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. So the temple is now obsolete. It's been fulfilled. So when should we worship? See, there was never a question of, well, we don't have to do it anymore, so we're just going to quit. No, the question was which day? That was why? Because the principle of the Sabbath was before the law, during the law, and here we are with after the law has been completed. The issue was which day? They picked Sunday because it would honor the fact that that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. So there's nothing magical about today, about Sunday. Or there's nothing magical about Saturday, because how many of you know that there are plenty of groups out there that say, we're better Christians than everybody else because we do our worship on Saturday? How many of you know what I'm talking about? They're big into this. We're Sabbath Christians and all this sort of thing. They're missing the point in a really, really, really big way. They're missing the point. Now, let's talk about that law for a second. The law of Moses, what was it? It was a way for one group of people to live out the principles of what it means to be godly. Those principles go beyond the law. They're bigger than the law. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Some people like to say, well, here we are as Christians. The law has been completed. We don't have to do any of those things in the law anymore. We don't have to worry about kosher eating. We don't have to worry about what kind of thread we wear. We don't have to worry about any of that stuff anymore. It's all completed. We just chuck it out. Right. Okay. But the law says you shall not murder. So does that mean that now that the law is fulfilled, it's okay to murder? Is it? Somebody say no. Okay. The law, please say no. Somebody says, the law says you shall not steal. So now that the law is fulfilled, we okay to steal now? No. Well, how do I know that? If the law is fulfilled, how do I know which things cross over and which things don't? Well, it's because you got to go deeper. You have to go deeper. You have to understand the principles that are underneath that law. If you don't understand the principles that are underneath, you won't understand what transcends. Does that make sense? For example, let me give you an example. The law says, do not eat pork. No bacon. Okay, you're out of luck. All right. Dead pig is good to eat, but the law says you shall not eat. Why? See, this animal was unclean for them. Now, some people speculate that the reason that God made this animal unclean for the people was for some sort of health reasons. And I don't know, there might be some truth to that. I really don't know. But I think it's more likely, if you look deeper and you try to find the principle, that all of these eating rules, all of these clothing rules, all of these cleanliness rituals that they had, there's a principle that they show that's bigger than those rules. How many of you know that that's what Jesus' whole point was when he came here? The Pharisees, they missed the point of the rule, and they added rules to the rules and added the rules to those rules because they missed the point. And Jesus was all over them about it. He was going, you are missing the point. You need to get underneath there. I gave you these rules as a way to live out the principles that are underneath. How do I know that Jesus meant that? Because Jesus said this. He said, well, you have heard that it is said, you shall not murder. Remember we just said that? But I'm saying to you, look at the principle that's underneath it. If you're even looking at a person with hatred and evil in your heart, you've already committed the sin of murder as far as God is concerned, because that's the principle that's underneath it. That's what Jesus is trying to say. He's saying the principle of do not murder is to protect the dignity of the human person. Protect that at all costs. And this, off my notes, is why I say for shame to New York. That they would celebrate the fact that you can murder a child all the way up to the moment of its birth. Shame on New York. People want to come to me and they want to say, this whole thing about abortion, and they want to come after me as a pastor and talk about, well, what about women who have been raped and incest and all this? What about the life of the mother? And they're going to come up with every kind of excuse in the world, and they are completely missing the point. What is the point? Human life is sacred. Why is human life sacred? Because you are made in the image of God. Your life is sacred. When is it sacred? Now, some people want to say, well, I'll tell you what, a pre-birth child is not fully human yet. It's just a cluster of cells. Well, okay, if I decide that a human life is only really human based on the number of cells that it has, then that means that somebody who's lost a leg is not fully human. They don't have enough cells, right? But nobody believes that, do we? Do we really believe that? No. A human being is human by virtue of the kind of being human is, not by the number of cells they have in their body. And other people want to argue, and they want to say, well, pre-birth babies, I call them pre-birth babies. They want to come up with scientific names in order to distance themselves from the truth, but that is a pre-birth baby. And they want to say, well, if we don't see the right kind of, brainwave function, then it's not truly human. But if I determine that any human being is only human based on some attribute that he or she has, then I can arbitrarily decide which attribute they should have, which is exactly what the Nazis did. Because if I decide it's about your mental acuity, then I can decide which IQ. Well, here's the line. Underneath this, you're not fully human, so bye. It's exactly what the Nazis did. They started with Down syndrome children. They weren't fully human, right? No, humans are human by virtue of the kind of being they are, not by any attribute that they possess or don't yet possess. Why? Because the principle of the law, do not murder, is the dignity of who a human being is by virtue of the kind of being that we are. By virtue of the kind of being that we are. That's the principle. So when you look at this principle here, you go, why should they not eat pigs? Let's look at that pig again. people want to look at this and they want to, why not? Because we eat bacon all the time. What's the problem? Well, you see, I think possibly, that what's going on here is that the reason they're not supposed to eat this animal is because it's an incomplete animal. Now, here's what I mean by that. You see, notice its feet. It has cloven hooves, but pigs do not chew a cud. Cows do. Cows have a cloven hoof, and they also chew the cud. They are a complete being. This is an animal that is incomplete. It only does half of what other cloven-hoofed animals do. So when the Israelites looked at that, they could see the principle. What's the principle? They are supposed to be completely sold out to God. Complete. So they don't touch, deal with, or eat an animal that is incomplete. And when they ask themselves, why am I not doing this? It's because I'm reminded that I am a completely sold out person. Does that make sense? Well, it's the same thing. Why were they not supposed to put two different kinds of seeds in their fields? If you look at the law, because they worship one God, not two, not three, not five, one. And what God wanted to drill into their heads, drill it into their heads based on what they eat, drill it into their heads based on how they put seeds in their field, drill it into their head right down to the underwear that they wear. You are sold out to me. And every time you put those tassels on, you're reminded, yeah, this is why I am dedicated to God. That was the whole point. Everything that they did was about that one principle. They are sold out. They are totally dedicated. They worship one God. So all those rules are just illustrations. They're just pictures about how to live out that principle. That's the point. Let's go on to verse 27. So as it came about on the seventh day, some of the people, they went out to gather, but they found none. And then the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? I just told you, don't do that, knucklehead. Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't in there. But see, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Listen, it was given to them. I've given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you bread for 2 days on the sixth day. Remain every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people finally figured it out and rested on the seventh day. So clearly, they were a long, long ways from figuring out that they're supposed to be totally sold out to God. They didn't understand the concept yet. Because, in order for them to be dedicated to God completely, they had to get it from the heart. And they weren't getting that, were they? Now, later, they finally started keeping the Sabbath. But how many of you know, eventually they lost the reason they were keeping the Sabbath, and it just became rule keeping. And then they added rules upon rules upon rules and became proud of themselves for how well they kept the rules and you didn't. They completely missed the point. The whole point of the Sabbath day is that you have a week in and week out reminder of the fact that you are supposed to be sold out to God. It wasn't supposed to be a burden. It was supposed to be a blessing. Let's think about it. In ancient culture, they didn't have holidays. They didn't have holidays. They only had religious festivals. So they didn't have, how many of you know that slaves didn't have a work week? They didn't do 40 hours and punch out. No, for centuries, these people had known only one thing. You are worked until you die. There was no dignity about being human. They were considered less than human. The Egyptians were human. They were the children of the gods. The Hebrews, they were just dirt under their feet, slaves. This is why the Egyptians had no problem coming in to the Hebrews and grabbing Hebrew baby boys and throwing them in the Nile River to be eaten by the crocodiles. They had no problem because these are not fully human. Abortion is nothing new. Not fully human. The Sabbath day was to remind them, no, boys, girls, you are fully human. You're made in the image of God. And God rested on the seventh day. So you can too. You don't have to give in to that lie that you're a slave forever and that you can never have the dignity of taking a day off to be refreshed. That's the principle. The seventh day is supposed to be a time for us to cease our normal activity and literally be refreshed in the idea of reconnecting with what our whole purpose is for this existence in the first place. The whole purpose of our existence is to be connected with Him. So if we are reminded of that week in and week out, it's going to be very, very helpful. How many of you know that they forgot pretty quickly? Didn't they? I mean, this whole story is about how quickly they're forgetting what God has done. How quickly they forget what the principle is for why we're doing what we're doing. How many of you know that you and I can do the same thing? It's easy to forget. Now, since the Sabbath day was given as a principle, not a rule, it is true we don't have to be legalistic about it. Because there are plenty of people that get very legalistic about the seventh day. If you don't wear the right threads on the seventh day, well, then you're not as good a Christian as so-and-so, right? I mean, what activities should you do or should you not do? I mean, I think that we miss the point when we start splitting those hairs because it's not about a law. It's not about a rule. It's about an invitation. You are invited to stop. You are invited to connect with God, with each other. You are invited to be refreshed and go, oh, okay, I can just chill. I can, it's got some decent music that, gets me going, makes me feel good. I can connect with my friends. I can sit here and reflect about, yes, we can do this. We can get up tomorrow morning and face the week, and we can live a godly life. I can be accountable with my friends. I can be encouraged by those around me in my dedication to the Lord. That's what it's all about. That's the whole point. That's what it's all about. But the world is completely involved in its own self-interest. And I know that's tough to deny. I know that it's difficult to deny our own self-interest, but it's not impossible. Let's take a look at verse 31, and we'll finish out the chapter here. It says, the house of Israel named it manna. So he's kind of doing a sum up now. He's kind of summing up everything that's happened. Manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers with honey. And then Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omerful of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put an omerful of manna in it, place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. And as the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The testimony means the written words, this word. The sons of Israel ate the manna 40 years. So I can say they did that. Until they came to an inhabited land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now, an omerful is a tenth of an ephah, in case you didn't know. Just want to make sure you got that. What's going on here? God knows people need focus. Human nature has not changed. God knows you and I need to remember. That's why he's having this memorial put there. That's why we have a Sabbath day. Because it's easy to get distracted by your work, by your life, by your family, by everything. It's easy to get tempted to completely check out of the fact that you and I, if we're disciples of Jesus Christ, are supposed to be totally dedicated to him. We're supposed to be completely dedicated to him. It's easy to get lost in your own self-interests. So like we learned last week, the point of the manna is learning to depend on God. Jesus is our manna. We're supposed to be in the Word. We learned that last week. So what's the point of the Sabbath? The point of the Sabbath is that one day in 7, you are invited to be refreshed, to reconnect in a complete dedication to God. Now, what we try to do here at this church is we try to make this a refreshing place. So when you go and invite your friends or the people you meet at Starbucks to come to church, what are you inviting them to do? Because they don't know. You got to tell them, hey, what we do at church, we chill. You could tell them just that. If you don't use the word chill, say relax. Okay, chill is a better word. Okay, but anyway, we chill. All we do is we just hang out. We hang out with like-minded people. We enjoy each other's company. We listen to some nice music. We talk about what the Bible says. We learn something. We interact with each other. It's a lot of fun. It's refreshing. You ought to come. I think you'll have a good time. Now, it's not about good time in terms of like going to a theme park, but it's good in the sense that you are refreshed and you feel, better about life. That's what it's all about. So the question, what should we do on Sunday? Well, don't get legalistic about it. It's a heart thing. For example, in my life, I find reading restful because I'm strange. My wife makes fun of me. My idea of pleasure reading is textbooks. But that's my idea. Some people hate reading. For them, reading is work. So if reading is work, don't read on the Sabbath. If reading is not work, like me, give me a good book, hot chocolate, fireplace, get out of my way. That's all I need. Okay, don't make it about rules. Make it about the heart. See, Hebrews 10:24 says this way. Let us think of ways. Let's come up with ways. Let's be creative on ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. That's what getting together is all about. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another. That's what it's all about, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Now, I bring this up, and again, not to be legalistic about it, but to be honest. The truth is, the average Christian only attends church once a month. That's average. Professing born-again believers attend church once a month. So I think in our freedom, because we are free to do that, we're not under laws, it's not about rules, but in our freedom, there's a danger, isn't there? I mean, this principle goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, guys. That's how far back this principle goes. And there is a danger that in our freedom, we can get complacent. And remember, those people out in the desert, following a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night, they could see God in the sky, and they still forgot. How about you and I? So the principle of coming here, gathering ourselves together, I don't think we can afford to lose that. It's not about legalism. It's about wisdom. How many of you see what I'm saying here? Now, we want to make this place the place you want to be at. We want you to come here and go, man, I just love it. My friends are there. I have a ball. I got the music I like. I learned something. I feel good. I am refreshed. That's what we want. That's what we're going to work to make it. And there's not a week goes by that somebody doesn't come up to give us a suggestion on how we could do it better. And I assure you, we do listen. We can't do everything, We can't do everything. But here's the key, and we'll close it with this. See, both before the law and after the law, God invites you and I to take one day in 7 to rest, be refreshed, and rededicate ourselves to being completely sold out to following Jesus in our daily lives. That's what it's all about. That's the key.